Mass unemployment, recognised by the government as the greatest single issue facing Australia, has prompted a rethink of labour market assistance. In a move away from programs that provided training but not necessarily jobs, the government is now hoping to entice the private sector, state and local government employers into tangible training schemes.
What it's saying is that for the amount of money that it's spending on its existing means of delivering the service, if we open it up to competition, can we get more results for the same amount of money?
What's in it for employment providers, local government areas, for example, to get behind the project?
Well, it's a chance for them to participate on very much their own terms.
Under the plan, the CES and Social Securities offices would be amalgamated. After registering for the dole, job seekers will be referred to training agencies, which in turn are paid by the government to prepare and place people in work. And that's where the buck stops. No work, no dole.
If they're referred to, they'll be obliged to accept the accept the referral, and similarly, the provider will be obliged to accept them.
The Knockout debating series began with topics such as fast food is harmful and wound up dealing with what could be Australia's greatest windfall in decades, hosting the Olympic Games.
Let's think of the true reality that lies behind hosting these games. The 2000 Olympics will make Australia famous.
The team from St Patrick's Lochinvar debated the downside of hosting the Games, while St Francis Xavier from Singleton took the affirmative to sell the Sydney Olympics.
These tourists will generate millions of dollars. But I know you want more.
As well as some constructive criticism, the adjudicators had the final say on the outcome of the debate.
After, as I said, a great deal of deliberation, we gave the debate to the affirmative side.
Tony Sheridan's 6-year reign is over. Voted in by a clear majority at a council meeting last night, former councillor Doug Eaton was today settling into his new office at Wyong Council. And he's already established his priorities, with unemployment and the effects of the growing population at the top of the agenda.
We've got a recipe for social disaster with unemployment rates of 30 or 40%, and I don't think anyone wants, and certainly I don't want to live in an area that has got to cope with those sort of social problems.
And while he claims he's not a radical, he's certainly keen to bring about change. One issue that's bound to ignite debate in the area is his support of circuses. Mr Eaton says he'd like to see more of them in the Shire, particularly during summer.
It's my personal view that that those animals are already here, and we're not going to achieve anything at all for their welfare by banning circuses.
Sarah Griffiths, NBN News.
Three Squadron was the first Australian squadron to head into action and remains one of its longest-serving frontline defence units. These days it's the roar of Hornet jet fighters, but through the years, from biplanes over the Western Front to dogfights over the North African desert in World War II, 3 Squadron has flown some of the world's most famous fighter aircraft.
It was the highest scoring fighter squadron in the last war, and in fact we had the highest score of enemy aircraft destroyed in North Africa and the Western Desert, and I'm pretty proud that I'm a member of that wonderful squadron.
Proud day too for former World War II Commanding Officer Bobby Gibbs, one of many veterans who turned out to wish their old squadron well on its 80th anniversary. Air Commodore Alan Tethridge was the reviewing officer for today's ceremony at Williamtown, home to 3 Squadron for the last 10 years.
Well, it's a different world now. In the 1940s we had aerial dogfights like World War I, pretty much. Now you don't have to see the enemy aeroplane before shooting it down, and that rather appeals to me. It'd be much easier. As long as you can see anything that might shoot at you from which you couldn't see, that would be rather distressing.
There are more than 700 estuaries around Australia which support fish and other wildlife, providing food and shelter and protecting shorelines. Over the years, the waterways have been used for urban and industrial development, often changing and sometimes destroying the natural environment. Now, efforts are underway to repair the damage. The 3-day Wetlands Rehabilitation Conference at the Shortland Wetlands Centre, one such attempt.
We had attendees from all over the world, from the UK, Netherlands, from the USA, from New Zealand, and all over Australia.
This morning, State Minister for Fisheries Bob Martin launched a new leaflet designed to further encourage the community to take action. Titled Help Fix Our Estuarine Wetlands, it provides information for people willing to help.
It gives people information on how to get help, how important the wetlands are, and how we can repair them and make them a lot better.
The woman was taken to the John Hunter Hospital for treatment after her horrific ordeal, which lasted for close to an hour and a half. The man broke into the woman's Elizabeth Street home shortly after 6 last night.
He's grabbed the woman, dragged her into her bedroom and sexually assaulted her.
The man eventually left the woman, walking into another room in the house. Seizing her opportunity, she ran to a neighbour's place where she called the police. The man was last seen running up Elizabeth Street towards the industrial highway. He's described as being in his mid-20s, 180 centimetres tall, with short dark hair, an olive complexion and solid build, wearing dark clothing. Police are appealing to anyone who lives alone to be careful and to make sure their house is securely locked at night.
Basically, anybody that lives by themselves, it may be either young or elderly, I don't think it really matters these days, just to be a little bit more aware of their own personal protection, and further to people that may live next door to people that are living by themselves, to keep a little bit more of an eye out for their well-being.
Emma Siossian, NBN News.
These are paintings which will be forever cherished, a collection of 76 works of art by students from Newcastle's Glendon and Stewart Special Schools and Hillsborough Public School. For the last few months, the students have been working towards this goal, knowing their work will be framed and hung for all to see. According to exhibition organiser Alison Sellers, painting plays an important role in the students' development.
It gives the children an opportunity to explore with different textures, different objects. A lot of the time we just don't use a paintbrush. It can be fingers, newspaper, marbles, golf balls, fly swatters, anything.
You only had to see the pleasure in the faces of the artists last night to know how proud they all felt, and so too their families who came along to buy the works. Money raised will go towards buying new equipment for the 3 schools involved. But the exhibition wouldn't have been such a success without the help of this young man, Broadmeadow student Danny Deng, who was last night putting finishing touches to the works. He and others from the Warramai School's framing service framed all 76 paintings. It's the 3rd year the exhibition has been held, and organisers say it's proven a worthwhile project between the special schools and Warramai, which caters for students with behavioural difficulties. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
The Cliff in Newcastle played host to the opening day of the state titles, surfers from across New South Wales vying for not only prestige, but also places in the Australian Championships. In clean surf up to a metre, the over 45s finished up a big opening day of competition. Lake Cadai's Peter Hudson in the white made the most of the conditions to win from the Northern New South Wales zone champion in Ronnie Goddard. In this afternoon's other finals, Danny Bond won the over 50s, Sandra English the women's over 28s, while the Mid-North Coast's Kathy Anderson was in blistering form in the over 35s, scoring a 9 and 2 perfect 10s in 3 consecutive waves.
2 perfect 10s off all 5 judges, a credit to the young lady, and I'd say the professional ranks await that girl.
It's the first round of most of the men's competitions tomorrow. The Opens start proceedings from 7 o'clock, while the under-28s, 35s, 40s and kneeboarders will also be in action.
All the boys come out of the woodwork tomorrow and they'll be flexing their muscles out there. Let's hope Huey provides us with some surf.
Today's sporting breakfast was the first chance the Hunters Olympians had to celebrate their success together. Disabled athletes Alicia Jenkins and Marilyn Mills, and kayak finalist Peter Scott, softball bronze medalist Natalie Ward and hockey gold medalist Shelley Andrews. Shelley was the linchpin of the women's hockey team which won the Atlanta Gold.
I don't think any words or any picture could describe the feeling of what we actually felt that day of winning. It certainly was overwhelming. But it was quite exciting.
According to Shelley, Olympic athletes have had little time to celebrate their success with a seemingly endless round of public appearances.
I thought when I got back from the Olympics that I'd be able to have a couple of months holiday and try and recover from the past 6 months.
Shelley is battling a crippling knee injury and has taken 6 months off to recuperate. Next January, she'll reassess the situation and decide whether to train for the 2000 Games. Blake Doyle, NBN News.
Central Coast-based Liberal MLC Mike Gallagher claims pressure from heavyweights in Sydney may have diverted funds earmarked for the coast to Sydney hospitals. Mr Gallagher says although Wyong Hospital is confident of receiving $2 million this year, there has been no guarantee of future funding, placing several new projects like after-hours surgery and satellite dialysis in doubt.
Both the new services not coming online as quickly as promised, and indeed a re-evaluation of the current services that are being provided. I'm looking further down the track than just the 96-97 budget. I'm looking at 97-98, and there appears to be no firm commitment there from the government as to how far they are prepared to go.
And he says any funding cutback would go against state government plans to invest in growth areas. Although the Health Board is concerned by the uncertainty, Chief Executive Stephen Chrisley says he's not anticipating a reduction and is hoping additional services can be offered.
We'd be hoping to get our fair share of funding. We're very proud of the services we offer in the Central Coast Area Health Service, and we want to offer a range of services to our community that means that they won't have to travel for Sydney for services when they can be provided locally.
The Stop Work meeting marked the start of what could be a long and drawn-out industrial campaign with BHP. Around 1,000 BHP blue-collar workers were told by union leaders that up to 3,000 jobs will go if the steelworks are scaled down. A series of resolutions were passed by workers, including union talks with BHP over the future of steelmaking involving Premier Bob Carr. But local officials seek support from other steel centres for Australia-wide industrial action and a public petition calling on BHP to maintain its operations in Newcastle. BHP Chairman Brian Loughton told shareholders yesterday there was doubt over future steel making in Newcastle. Unions say that's the death knock for local operations.
I don't accept that the chairman of the board of the biggest company in Australia and one of the biggest companies in the world shoots his mouth off without knowing the facts. I'm sure that Brian Loughton conveyed exactly what BHP planned to do with Newcastle yesterday.
Mr Maher says workers would welcome another steel-making company into Newcastle.
For BHP to pack up their bongos and want to leave Newcastle, maybe because their management skills aren't up to making a quid out of it, well, if that's going to be the case, maybe it's time for someone else to move into the steelworks.
The AWU says BHP contractors will be included in the campaign. Blake Doyle, NBN News. Last weekend, Ruti Teiru was walking with extreme difficulty, the result of an infection which left him with a twisted spine and a deformed left leg. But thanks to Newcastle doctor Trevor Best, Ruti has been given a new lease of life. An operation earlier this week involving placing a T-shaped plate in the boy's hip has been a success, with Ruti now recovering in traction. With the help of Lingard Hospital's nurses, Ruti will be kept in traction for another month. When he returns home, the quietly spoken boy is looking forward to just one thing. But his father, who's been at his bedside throughout the ordeal, has other ideas.
He said he wanted to play games. I think I wouldn't allow him to do that until he was 2 or 3 years' time.
Ruti Teiru Sr. has praised the hospital, which undertook the operation for free. Police say the driver of the light blue Mazda would have died instantly. At around 5 o'clock this morning, he ploughed into the back of this semi-trailer parked in the breakdown lane for a rest stop.
We're not absolutely certain of the cause of the accident, but we believe that fatigue may have been involved.
North of Toronto, the crash scene isn't far from where, just months ago, 2 people were killed and 3 seriously injured in a similar tragedy. A driver had been changing a tyre in the early hours of the morning when a light truck slammed into the back of his vehicle. As with today's crash, there had been no screech of brakes, no skid marks. This morning, police blocked one lane of the freeway as they spent hours removing debris from the road. Sarah Griffiths, NBN News. Mr McMullen says the steel industry is facing a crisis and the government's lack of foresight and planning is to blame. In the midst of a Labor Listens tour of regional New South Wales, he announced that unless communication with unions and industries improved, steel making in Australia may fall apart.
The government has to focus on developing plans to keep steel making in Australia and to keep steel exports from Australia, and that will be important for Newcastle.
At Eastlake Skillshare, it was more foreboding predictions, with unemployed people warned that job prospects won't be getting better. With the service undergoing massive funding cuts, Mr McMullen took the opportunity to pledge Labor's support. At Jules Primary School today, the fruits of one project were on display, a new multi-purpose room built by 10 long-term unemployed.
It's projects like this that give people that work upon them current training, current skills, an enormous lift in confidence and the ability to be able to go out there and find work.
But the future of similar projects is grim, with the New Work Opportunities program due to wind up shortly. For the coordinator, it's a disappointing end to a scheme that he says does so much for the community.
It's sad to see that these people have tried so hard and there may be a very cloudy future for them.
Sarah Griffiths, NBN News.
Stormwater drains choked with rubbish is what this latest environmental campaign is aimed at stopping. Member for Newcastle, Bryce Gaudry, handed over the pollution kits that will help teach students stormwater and waste management strategies. Mr Gaudry says all teachers are being urged to use the kits, not just those associated with geography or science.
It's really emphasising the fact that it's everybody's issue, and of course if we're going to have all teachers involved in it, we do have to ensure that they've got the resources that will maintain student interest and also give the good facts and approaches to minimising pollution.
Jamie Arthurs says the younger generation means well when it comes to being environmentally friendly, but often fail to follow through with their good intentions.
They are becoming more aware, but it's still a bit sad. Sometimes they know all the right things to do, but sometimes it's still a bit hard to carry it out in practice.
Amanda Bolger, NBN News.
Staff spent most of today packing away some of the 10,000 files which will now be sent to Sydney. From Monday, all immigration inquiries will be handled over the telephone. The closure is one of 6 around Australia, the federal government claiming the office is no longer viable, only serving 20 clients a day. Office staff say they serve at least 35.
They're reducing resources, taking away people, removing face-to-face contact and making the system much more complicated. I mean, that's not improving the service, that's destroying the service.
The federal member for Newcastle, Alan Morris, says Newcastle is reeling under the federal government's budget cuts.
I'm sorry, but what's going to happen now is that Newcastle is being relegated to being a small country town while this government turns more and more centralist.
One client who was surprised to learn of the office's closure says he doesn't have time to travel to Sydney for help.
People from Newcastle to Sydney cost you 2 hours, and what about you waiting maybe another 2 hours? When you go home, in 6 hours we'll finish.
4 of the 10 employees of the office have been employed elsewhere. The remainder are now looking for work. Blake Doyle, NBN News.
With 3 teams outed from the NBL, there'll be a glut of players on the market come the end of the season, and while the Falcons aren't jumping at signing a whole new side for next year, they do admit there will be changes.
We have to look at ways to improve our team. You can't stand still in this league. If you stand still, you get left behind.
The off-season is set to be one of the biggest ever for Newcastle. On top of their recruitment drive, a handful of players have also been targeted for a stint in the States. Assistant coach for St Louis College in Florida, Jeff Cobb, was at Falcons training today, eyeing up the talent.
They're looking at a couple of our young guys, the possibility of Matt Lowe joining them for 1 year in the off-season here.
The focus now, though, is solely on tonight. After missing the October action, the Falcons want one last hurrah.
We won some games we shouldn't have won this year, but we lost a lot more that we should have won. So it's a little bit disappointing, but we're just going to go out here and give it our best effort tonight and try to get us a win up.
It's disappointing that we have to turn around and say it was a learning experience, but we certainly feel we should have been in the playoffs, and that's what our goal will be next year.
Jonathan Upton, NBN News. Play started in miserable conditions at Newcastle's District Park courts today. Blustery winds playing havoc across the courts, while the wet weather underfoot made the return of serve all that bit harder. The standard of play mirrored the conditions as the state's elite young players did their best to overcome the elements. Conditions far from ideal, but the Open has attracted one of the strongest fields ever. 700 players from across New South Wales and the ACT are involved in the competition, and there's plenty up for grabs. With the event recognised by Tennis Australia, players are vying for national points. Finalists will improve their national ranking and their seeding for the upcoming national titles in January. First and second round action continues tomorrow. Semi-finals start on Thursday. Jonathan Upton, NBN News.
"29-year-old Craig Cole took a few hours out of his day to just lie about, with a few friends, some SES workers, an ambulance officer or two and some of the local police. The occasion for the gathering, a little plumbing work. You see, Craig's year-old son had dropped his father's car keys down a drain and Dad was doing something about it. 3 hours later, he and a growing entourage were still doing something about it. Craig had become attached to the task, quite literally, and the game had lost its fun. By the time a jackhammer was brought in, it had dawned on everyone that things had gotten out of hand. But finally, the hand had also gotten out of things. Both the drain and a shoulder dislocated as a result. A few tears and some discomfort later, it was all worth it. Craig retrieving a long-lost bottle of his wife's nail polish and an AWOL toothbrush. As for the car keys, he didn't need them in the end, choosing to hitch a ride with an ambulance instead. Laura Saperstein, NBN News, late edition.
Newcastle Harbour has slowly forged a reputation as one of Australia's best water skiing venues. It now has a chance to prove it can match it with the world.
We've been granted from the IWSF, the International Water Ski Federation, that Australia will host the 10th World Water Ski Championships.
At least 100 of the world's elite skiers from up to 14 countries will contest the championships. Locals are intent on making the most of the home ground advantage, with the championship shaping up as a final farewell to one of Australia's best.
Well, Leanne Brown will be here, of course, because she's our reigning world champion. She's won the world championship twice now, so she'll be out to really put a stamp on the water ski racing by going for a third successive title.
Organisers expect crowds in excess of 30,000 for each of the Newcastle races. The championships will begin in late October next year and finish in early November. Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
Planet Earth 2000 has been billed as the single most important event for Gosford and the Central Coast. Set down to coincide with the 2000 Olympics, it's hoped the environmental extravaganza will attract more than 5 million visitors and create 60,000 jobs. Interest in the concept is high, with a similar but smaller weekend event at Mount Penang attracting 60,000 people last month.
This is an event equivalent to Brisbane Expo. There's a lot of interest in the community there, and it's a huge event for not only for the Central Coast but for New South Wales and Australia.
But before it gets off the ground, organisers need to attract $180 million in private investment. A working group report outlining how that investment will be attracted was handed to Planning Minister Craig Knowles today. Organisers say interest in Planet Earth 2000 has been shown.
We believe we will have a private sector developer financier in place within the next 3 to 4 months.
The federal government has indicated it will contribute $25 million to the event.
Yeah, we're going in to win, but even if we don't, our preferences will decide who wins the seat, and that is probably the lesson that we're trying to teach both the government and the opposition.
In the Knights' heartland, the Newcastle Workers' Club, the Super League court ruling attracted little interest. Out in the streets, the general feeling was one of disappointment.
I don't think anyone should be able to just run roughshod over someone who's had an organisation going for that many years.
I think the game was better left as it was, personally.
I've been quite happy to stick with the way it's been.
Knights officials would not appear on camera but did say we'll have to look at the fine print. The Hunter Mariners said they are now looking forward to the future. Legal opinion is the club will play next season.
If the Hunter Mariners want to get up and going, it appears, and we haven't read the whole judgment yet, that in fact they could be going next year.
Pending more legal debate, the Knights will lose a number of players back to the Mariners, players like Beecham, McCormack and Godden. For the financially stricken Newcastle Knights, this Super League decision makes their future uncertain. The Hunter Mariners are now in a position of power, and the question being asked tonight is, can this region carry 2 rugby league sides? Peter Ryan, NBN News. The Pages River was in full force last night after a heavy downpour in the Murrurundi area. The floodwaters broke through into the town, but daylight showed there was only minor damage. The site where a building had been washed away in floods in January, again underwater. The last floods had created major problems, with a damage bill of more than $1 million. This time, locals were ready for the worst.
We were well prepared this time. Had friends and people came down and we packed up, but no water went in. We had the sandbags.
The sandbags kept the overflow through the town this time down to about 20 centimetres. SES workers have confirmed the river broke through where the last flood had cut a hole in levee banks. The levee had not been repaired. Murrurundi Council was working on a flood study. Council is now looking for state government funding to fix the problem. Peter Ryan, NBN News, Late Edition.